Okay, we'll make a start now. Other people are inevitably going to turn up as we get through this. So as Jessica said, if you could please do us the courtesy of muting the microphone. Obviously, we like interaction, so there is a facility at the end of this webinar to ask any questions you have. Also, as we go through, there's a chat panel. So if you want to jot things down to pick up later into the webinar, then please do so. And so good morning and welcome to the first in a series of webinars presented to you by both the team at i3Secure, me, Barry, and our partners at Coalescent. As well as being topical and informative, we hope that they serve us some way in terms of an introduction to friends we do not know yet and to a pool of resources for you. So hopefully we can help you achieve your goals. We want to make the most of the time we have, so kindly given to us from your schedule. So we are keen to hear from you and get to the root of any issue or question which you may have. We will make sure to be able to speak and interact and cover off any questions we get at the end of this presentation. Okay, so all those who've just joined, thank you for joining. Please do set your microphone to mute and cameras off if possible to save bandwidth. Participation is not mandatory, but you will get more from this than any of our other webinars if you choose to ask questions and interact. Okay. So the agenda is up on the screen there. You can see that. We'll start the day by completing this introduction and move us on to some of the proposed changes to ISO 27002, which in turn may affect your current information security management system, especially if you're certified to ISO 27001. After I've finished talking, I'll then hand over to Leanne from Coalescent, our partners, and they will talk to you about their excellent compliance tool called Dapian. There will be time for question and answers at the end of the webinar, and of course the facility for you to answer questions as we go through. Just put them in the chat if you need a reminder or a placeholder to pick it up as we go through. More than likely, though, as we read one slide, the question you may have may come on the next slide. So obviously keep it to the end if you can, but if you feel like you need to ask as we go through, please feel free to do so. So there we go. That's me. I'm Barry Graham from i3Secure. I'm one of the principal consultants largely tasked with either the implementation or the audit of ISO 27001 management systems. I also audit against 27001 and it's ISO 27701 for certification bodies in the UK. So I've got a broad range of experience and a variety of customers across a lot of sectors. So without further ado, let's get to the heart of today's webinar. We're looking at the 27000 series, in particular 27002, and some of the changes which may be coming next year. This is going to have implications if you have a 27001 certificate in terms of the way risks are addressed and risks are controlled and that exist in your system already. We will cover 27001 implementation on another webinar, but for now we're going to focus on 27002, what that means for Annex A in 27001 and some of the changes which are being proposed to that system. And that's me. You can find me on LinkedIn if you need. Okay, so i3, we have a range of skills and services that lead and advise and support clients, no matter how big or small, or as I've just said, from which sector of the economy you live in. We have public sector and private sector customers, and we carry out a variety of services, which you can see on screen there. My piece of that puzzle is having a look at audit and ISO 27001 implementation and audit. So the scope for my part of this presentation is outlined on the screen for you now. We're going to look at where 27002 sits in the ISO series to begin with, and hopefully bring you into line with what that means for your ISO 27001 certification. And then we'll move on to the differences between those two things. Then we'll look at Annex A and risk management, the changes. So the feature of this webinar is some of the changes to 27002. We'll cover that. We'll have a look at Dapian and Coalescent from our partners, and then follow up with a questions workshop interactive session at the end. So then, the ISO IEC 27000 series comprises information security standards. They're published jointly by the ISO and the International Organization for Standardization, and the IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Commission. The series itself provides best practice recommendations on information security management, the management of risk through information security controls within the context of an overall management system or ISMS. The Series is deliberately broad in scope and covering more than just privacy, confidentiality, or technical cybersecurity issues, for example, and it is applicable to organizations of all shapes and sizes. The full list of standards within the 27 series is considerable and covers a wide variety of topics and certainly things pertinent to the world we live in today. Quite simply, it would be a whole webinar all on itself to go through each of the ISO standards within the 27 series. Could just hear a microphone. Just a reminder, if you're on the webinar, could you please mute the microphone? Thank you. The full list of standards is considerable, as I've said, so we can't go through them all. We are going to focus primarily on the three on the right of your screen there, 27001, 27002, and we will touch upon risk management as we go through this. But as I said, if you want more information about any of those things, then speak to us at the end, and we'll perhaps raise a webinar around that in the future. So then, 27001 versus 27002, what's the difference? Well, quite simply, anyone with an understanding of information security will have encountered 27001. Commercially, it is universally recognized as being a good benchmark for organizations who claim to have an effective handle on information security and governance and risk management. The certification provided by having 27001 is prestigious, proudly displayed by all who have achieved it. You may, however, not be as familiar with 27002. It is a standard which is supplementary to 27001 and provides guidance on how to implement the controls which are listed at Annex A of 27001. So if you've got a 27001 in place, you'll have a statement of applicability with 114 controls listed, and then you decide whether or not you've chosen those controls to address any risks you've identified. What 27002 does is take the next step from those controls which simply have a list within Annex A and tell you a little bit more about it. You cannot certify to 27002 alone because it's just a detailed description of things which are included in 27001. So there are three main differences between 27001 and 27002, which are detail, certification, and applicability. And I've called those out on the right-hand side of the screen, which you can see there. 27001 is far more broad and less descriptive, whereas 27002 is a next step for the controls you've selected and more detailed, more prescriptive about what should happen, how you should implement. You cannot certify to 27002 alone. There's no certificates for that, and it is just a list of best practice risk controls. In terms of implementation, all clauses within 27001 must be implemented for you to have an effective ISMS, whereas 27002 is not mandated for implementation. It is simply a descriptive. But this is the thing which is changing, and in turn, 27001 Annex A will change too. So then, why make these changes? Well, it's a relatively straightforward answer. If you think about the world you lived in if you were here or an adult in 2012 and 2013, when the 27001 last had its big update, there's been some minor adjustments to the standards then, but fundamentally the standard is now the same as it was then. But everything in the world around us has changed. You know, last year we went through COVID, we all were suddenly working at home, and we found that we could do that. And the pace of life in technology terms is extremely fluid. As you know, today's cutting edge technology is tomorrow's standard. So the ISO standard needs to move with it, and with it, the risks to the information you use and the infrastructure you have that information on needs to be controlled in the same way. So ISO is perceived to be many as a benchmark of good practice in terms of demonstrating how effective your information governance is. And to maintain this perception, it's likewise very important for ISO to update and keep abreast of any changes in the world around. So some of the changes which are being made are listed on the screen for you there. And the most interesting one perhaps is the one at the bottom there. If you are familiar with Annex A of 27001, you'll know that there are 114 controls across 14 domains, so A5, A6 onwards, etc. And that's going to be reduced to simply 4. So 4 control domains, which will be organization, people, technology, and physical. So a streamlined sort of approach to the way they do things, but as we'll discover next, an enhancement in terms of what those controls actually will mean. And so on to the specifics. What's going to change? As we had a look in the previous slide, the control numbers have changed in terms of domains, and so have the overall control numbers. As part of this reshuffle, some controls have been generated from new, and some controls have been consolidated, and some have been moved altogether. On screen, you'll see the new controls, which have been incorporated into the new ISO 27002 standard, or will be. And in turn, that will mean a change to Annex A in 27001. There are some new things that we have to address, and those are the top table you can see on the screen there, such as identification of threats, understanding where your threats come from, and taking appropriate action. And for the first time, the second one, what is labeled as 5.2, don't get too wrapped up in the numbers, but 5.23 will be information security for use of cloud services. Now, at the moment, it's an entire 27 standard, so 27017 or 27018 addresses cloud services, PII, etc. But within 27001, it will be a requirement to have security around the use of cloud. And so on and so forth. You can see there that some of these things are naturally part and parcel of what people do who work in information governance and information security especially. These are things which already occur. It's simply not required to achieve 27001 certification at the moment to demonstrate this, even though obviously there's not many people will not do at least some of the things you can see on the screen there. As both a third party and a consultant auditor, these are topics which are frequently raised when I'm around working with my colleagues and customers. So it's genuinely heartening to see some consideration of these given within ISO proposed changes. You'll see some overlap with existing controls, and I'm looking here at the config management especially, and secure coding, for example. Those already have some addressing in the current control set within Annex A. And it's likely this activity is already captured in that way. The deleted controls are equally interesting. So they're removing some controls which you must demonstrate as things stand today. And that includes the handling of assets, the removal of assets from physical premises, and reporting on weaknesses. That is not to say that those things are no longer important. They're just going to be framed in a different way. It is interesting that asset controls are being removed, namely the descriptive for asset handling and the removal of assets from physical premises, which, as we know, as we've not been physically on site in some places since February of last year, I feel it's now a reflection of what is a common working practice. So a redesign of what a security control is, as opposed to removing the necessity to think about it. Security weaknesses will still clearly need to be reported. However, this control is now within a different control set and domain and consolidates on other things which an organization may do to address information security weaknesses. And these are covered in the next slide. Now, this is a busy slide. You will forgive me. Just as a bit of orientation, on the right-hand side are the current Annex A 27001 control indicators. So 8.5.1.1 and 5.1.2, for example, are policies for information control. On the left is the new labeling. Quite simply, there's going to be a relabel of the controls and the control domains, as we've discovered before. So on the left is what it will look like when the standard, the 27002 standard, and therefore Annex A, is changing. And those changes are coming next year, early next year. So just to remember, on the right is their current controls and the controls which have been consolidated into one place. And then on the left, counterintuitively, that's what it will look like once the changes are now in place. A common observation when I'm implementing and organizations who are not familiar with 27001 ISMS is overlapping of controls. And for example, we ask questions about backups in a number of different areas. Where do you do information backup and restore? It's a feature of both your operational process and your business continuity / disaster recovery plans. Another example from the 2013 version, which is that top line there, is at the moment you're required to have a set of policies for information security, which are defined, approved by management, published, etc. And that's 5.1.1, and 5.1.2 is the ongoing review of these policies. And quite simply, that's now consolidated to having policies for information with an assumption that they're going to be regularly reviewed. It's just not two risk controls anymore. and so on and so forth as you move down that list. So the inventory of assets, the transfer of information, for example, all of those things which are individual controls at the moment have just been consolidated to say, okay, you must inventory information, for example, or have a way of transferring information securely. So it makes sense in many regards, and those who are familiar with Annex A will see some relief almost in the way that they've had a look at the way the control set sits at the moment and where they want to be with it once these proposed changes are made. So there we go. The number of overall controls will reduce from 114 in the current version, i.e. 2013 version, down to 96 within the proposed changes version. So yeah, 114 down to 96. At the moment, the process will still be the same. There's going to be no change to the clause area, which requires you to generate an Annex A for a 27001 implementation program. It's simply the number of controls within your SOA document is going to reduce and hopefully reduce the burden of maintenance and policy generation on the back of that. I hope that makes sense. So just to summarize before I hand over, changes to 27002 are coming, and in turn, they're arguably overdue. However, it's not been released yet. That is proposed to be actioned very early next year, 2022. So in 2022, quite simply, they're going to change 27002, which will have a knock-on effect of changing ISO 27001 Annex A. Some controls have been adjusted, some have been deleted, and some have been consolidated to reduce the overall number of controls within Annex A. If this is approved, then it will likely mean that people with an ISO 27001 management system, which has been certified by a certification body, is going to require some changes. So there's going to be a little bit of maintenance required if these changes come to light, because you've got to go back into your risk framework, have a look at how you're currently controlling some of the risks you've identified, and adjust the way in which you present the control of those risks through your risk treatment plan, etc., to reflect the new labeling and the new controls which have been put into place. So I hope that makes sense. And like I said, if you've got any questions about this or 27001, 27002, there's going to be time at the end of this webinar for you to directly engage. Despite these changes, one thing which will never change for certification bodies or the certificate holders out there is the need to demonstrate compliance, not only to those certification bodies if you have a certificate, but to all of your business stakeholders. Ensuring the requirements for data protection and governance are addressed it has never been more important. And now our partners at Coalescent will show you Dapian and how you can do this with their fantastic platform. And so that's me. Leanne, over to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Barry. That's certainly the first time I've seen those changes set out, so that's really useful to see. Thank you. I'll start sharing my screen, and largely I'm going to jump straight into a demo of the product. Barry, you can see my screen. That's all come through okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I
Lovely.
can see you now. Yep.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm Dr. Leanne Hawkins and I'm Chief Operating Officer of Coalescent Limited. And we have the product Dapian, which is a digital compliance product that originated in the public sector. So it was born out of a collaboration between all those organisations you see there. So a real mix of local authorities, universities, the ICO, and sort of the NHS, as well as training providers like Act Now. So all of those organisations contributed the funds and pulled their funds into the middle to build this product, and indeed put their IG expertise in the centre to design and build this with us. It's a relatively new product. It's been around since the end of 2020 and is rolled out very widely across the public sector and just starting to move into areas of the private sector now as well. So we started this with a discovery phase, which was looking at, well, what's the challenge we're trying to address? And as I say, it originated with data protection impact assessments, and that generally the IG teams within these businesses were at capacity and largely the bulk of the heavy lifting of a DPIA was falling to those teams, and they very much wanted to see the responsibility pushed back into the wider business, get general staff members that are not expert in this process to take more responsibility for themselves. Staff members put off entirely by the process and avoid it if they can. Often DPIAs getting done retrospectively, which I'm sure is not news to any of you here, but that's not the situation that we want to be in. So that's the challenges that we were trying to address, I say originally with DPIAs and now expanding into information sharing agreements as well. That's a separate module in the product that's available in addition to our DPIAs, and now moving on to record of processing activity and information asset registers as well, but I will talk more about our roadmap towards the end. So I'm going to jump straight into a demo, but just to cover very briefly what the different sets of permissions we have here in the product. So tailored very specifically at different audiences. This is the only product in the market that is designed and directed very much at non-information governance experts in owning more of this process for themselves. Very much still a role for the IG teams, DPOs, etc., to play a role here, but they're there to support the process, prodding and poking where they're needed and where their expertise is required, rather than that being the default, oh, just send that to the IG team and they'll do that for us. So very much trying to push the responsibility back into the business to do that. So a set of permissions then that handhold staff members and non-experts through the process of understanding if they need a DPIA or ISA and what type of templates would best suit their needs. So it literally handholds them and tells them which ones are best for them to use. It then allows them to be collaborative in the completion of those templates. So whether that's because they have colleagues that they need answers from, or whether it's because they want the DPO to come in and have a look, or whether it's because they're partnering with organizations or staff members beyond their organizational boundaries and they want to invite them into the process as well. Then a set of permissions that's designed for people that are signing off, so the sign-off steps and any expertise that need to be supplied at any of these points. So things like signatory and advisory roles coming in here as well. And finally, a third-party access for those, if you want to give access to people outside of your boundaries, we have a very strict set of permission giving access to only specific elements of the product for those individuals. So let's move straight on to a demo. As I go through this demo, I'm not going to cover in masses of detail the questions that we're asking. There's just not time, but I'm very happy for anyone here that wants to have access to our demo product. Very welcome to have that. Just get in touch and we'll get you set up on our demo product free of charge. Have a look and explore this for yourself in your own time in detail. But once you get into the product, you're kind of landed on your dashboard, and that plays out to you some various sort of metrics that you might be interested in. If we capture the data, you can report on it. So all the reporting aspects are here as well. But largely what we're here to do as a non-expert is to understand if I need to do a DPIA and or indeed an information sharing agreement, and what type of templates would best suit my needs. So I would do that by starting my DPIA, or if it was an ISA, starting my ISA there as well. I'm going to jump forward a couple of steps just to save a little bit of time. And in here, I have one that's partially completed. So I have a DPIA here that I'm starting, and I can see I've done my screening questions, and that will tell me if I do or don't need to do a DPIA and what type of DPIA template will best suit my needs. In this case, it's suggesting a full DPIA and indeed an information sharing agreement as well. So if I have a look at the screening questions just to show you what that looks like. Apologies, I'm going to have to do that. Yeah. Okay, so our screening questions then are as such. These are 13 questions, yes or no answers. This is probably the first point in the process where the ICO got heavily involved with reading what these questions were saying and helping us to change some of the language that was being used, which is really critical to help support those non-experts in this process. Wherever we still felt like some of the language just was inaccessible, we then implement these green text boxes left, right and centre, and that's us putting the expertise on the shoulders of non-experts to help them answer these questions, delivering quality as well as quantity. So idea being, you read the question, yes and no answers all the way through these 13 questions. So no typing at this point, really high level. Let's just get the right response in, and it will tell you at the end of this process if a DPIA is required or otherwise. So that's what I've already done in here. I've already done my screening questions and the responses are in there. It suggested I needed to do a DPIA. It was the full DPIA template that was the right one for me, and so I have that in my list here. So I can go ahead and start completing that, and I can be collaborative in the way that I'm doing it. So for example, I will start typing my own responses, and I might get to a point where I don't know the answer to some of these questions that I'm being asked. So I want someone else to help me in this process. So maybe this question here, 2.2, I need someone else to help me with that. So I will go and ask for that support. So this is a form that you can come back to, save, return to as many times as you like. There's no limit on that. It's not a do it in one go or forever hold your peace. So I'm going to go and ask for some support for that. So I'll reassign that to, it could be John Smith, it could be whoever it might be, but I'll choose this user because I have access to their account. And I might say, can you help me with question 2.2 or anything else I might want to say to them. Maybe ask them directly for the answer that I need. You'll see now that that's assigned not to me anymore, it's assigned to this person, John Smith, or information asset owner as the case is here. And that person is now going to get an email notification to let them know that they're being asked for that support. My conversation with this person is going to build over here on the right hand side. So anything they reply to me via email, so they might get the email and go, well, do you know what, I just know the answer to that question, type it out in the email and hit reply. That response will feed into here and my conversation with them can go from there. So none of this data content is lost. So from an auditing perspective, whether these happened in or outside of the product, as long as it is connected to that email exchange, it will land into the product and you can report on that as well. More likely though, that individual will get their email notification. Just let that. There we go. There's the email notification that's come in. They'll get that email notification and they will follow the link that they're given in that email and come into the product directly to provide that support. So really collaborative, kind of think Google Docs style. Multiple people can come into these forms and work on them with you. All tracked, all audited, and you can see every change that that individual made. So for example, up here, we have our version control. So everything is tracked and I can see what's been done here. I can also add watchers to any of the forms that I'm working on. So whether that's just because I want my department manager to be aware that there's something going on here and they're interested in seeing how this DPIA or ISA is progressing, then maybe don't want to get directly involved in it. They're not bothered about typing and writing stuff in it, but they just want to be aware that of its progress. They could be added to that watchers list and that will give them access to the DPIA or ISA and will provide them with status updates on that as well. So you get to a point once you've completed your template, which looks like this. This is a not completed one, but you get the gist. You read the question, follow the guidance that you're being given, and then construct your quality answers as a non-expert. You get to the end of the process, and which is the identification of risks. So I'll scroll right to the bottom. So here is where we're saying, Great, you need to identify these risks, but we're going to give you a helping hand here as well. So as well as constructing your own manual risks, we've got some suggested ones here for you, which is very specifically relevant to the form and data that you've entered into this DPIA. So based on the way that you've completed this template, we've found the following things that are glaringly obvious from a risk perspective. So the idea being that the user goes, yeah, okay, I agree with that one, and that'll be added to my risk section, and this one, and so on and so forth. It also acts as a really good checklist for the DPO or anyone signing this off, just to look at these and go, well, these are very obvious, so if these aren't included, then there's going to be something here that we need to look at. So it's quite a useful checkpoint for others to look at as well. What we do though say is these are only suggested, these aren't the entire list of things that you need to consider. So you do need to add your own manual ones as well, and we give you a template for doing so and provide you with the guidance to do that with all the risk scoring based on a 5x5 matrix, and that generates those scores for you automatically. So that's another really key feature, kind of supporting those non-experts to construct these agreements and assessments with quality. At some point that's all complete and you'll be looking to progress that on for sign off, so you would submit that. There's no point in me trying to do that, it's a very blank form, so it's going to throw up a load of errors. I click on each one and it will take me to the point in the process where that is failing to rectify whatever the field validation that's not conforming is. That will take all day if we do that together, but you will be able to submit your forms once your forms validate against the validation that we have here. So at no point are you able to submit an incomplete DPIA. If it's incomplete, you're still collaborating on it, that's fine. Assign it left, right and centre and get it complete. But at the point that it is finished, you will be able to hit the submit button. Here you also have the ability to attach files. So if there's anything that sits alongside your DPIA, process flows, technical documentation, information sharing agreements, whatever it might be, that you can attach those from anywhere as well. So let's come out of this for now. So if we look back at our kind of top level of our case, we have our screening questions, our information sharing agreement, and our full DPIA, all of which behave in a very similar way. They're collaborative. You get your the organisations that you need to have signing up to this agreement. You get them to come into the platform and provide their signatures in here as well. The auditing, of course, tracks and timestamps as and when all of that happens. There's some other features just to point out. The construction of these documents, that's great. You've been through them and you've completed them, but they also need to be reviewed on a regular basis. So we have our schedule review date features here, which allow you to set the timeframes that you will need to come back and review them in the future, whether that's because you've got a project that's moving from pilot phase into business as usual, or just because some time has elapsed, which means something is likely to have changed. The system will send out notifications to those that need to know and bring them into the system to conduct that review, so you're never kind of behind or missing those review dates. Another feature that we felt was really critical to non-experts or organisations that are working closely with their partners was the ability to share your DPIAs essentially publicly or specifically with another organisation. So your DPIAs and your ISAs will remain private to you as an organisation, as you would expect. But if you do need to or want to share those documents outside of your business, then you can change that to make them available to those organisations. Great way that that's being used at the moment in the public sector specifically is a local authority has done a DPIA. It's a great example of a Microsoft Teams DPIA. We had this example just a few weeks ago with York City, and they wanted to share that with others. So they changed that to make it publicly available in our external search, which means now as a best practice DPIA, that's available for others to look at and take a steer from. And over the last few months, we've built up a really good library of those best practice DPIAs. So kind of a first port of call for anyone that's a bit unsure as to what these DPIAs might look like or what these information sharing agreements might look like. They can look at other examples of them and take a steer from them. You also have the facility to clone your agreements and your assessments. So if you're needing to produce the same DPIA for 5 different organisations, that can be done very quickly just by cloning it and making some subtle changes. Also a useful feature if you want to publish a redacted version of these documents. So you don't maybe want to share publicly the original because it might contain some information that highlights vulnerabilities. So if you take a clone of that and redact it, you might be willing to share that summarized or redacted DPIA, and that means you can do that very quickly with this cloning feature. So I guess that's probably as much as we've got time to kind of cover in this demo, but please do, if you want to have a look at this for yourself, you scrutinize all the questions that we're asking and how the workflow works, just give us a shout. We're very happy to give you demo access and you can play with this in your own time. Couple of bits just to cover off then. So our roadmap, so where are we going next? We've done DPIAs, we've done information sharing agreements. We're now moving on to an information asset register and a record of processing activity, which are able to be manually updated, but also automatically updated from the production of our DPIAs and any other documents that are relevant in the product. So that kind of gives those teams that are responsible for managing those tools just a bit of a helping hand. So they've got more visibility as to what's going on across the business, and it will automatically populate the relevant fields for them. Then equality impact assessments as well. I forgot to mention, we have a data ethics assessment in here as well, so that's already in place. That was rolled out just last week, but moving on from that one, we're now tapping into things like equality impact assessments, bolstering our automated risk section and adding sort of supplier assessments or action plans for risk protection and what those actions that result from any of those. So that's kind of where we're going with the product. That will probably see us through the next 3 or 4 months, and then after that we'll go back to our customer base and ask them what they want to see happen next. So everything that we're doing at the moment has been directly prioritized by our customer base, and that's how we align our development over the next few months. So just to give you a bit of a summary then of what impact this has had within the public sector. On average, across our entire customer base, their savings from efficiencies and the improvements to the processes that they're running in terms of DPIAs and ISAs, it's about a 64%, it's 63.7%, but 64% in efficiency savings on average across our customer base. And they have seen drastically their backlogs of these agreements and assessments diminish because they have those slicker processes to run them through, and the quality of their assessments has also increased. So not only the numbers but also the quality, which is really, really important, and it's achieving what it's supposed to. It is simplifying the process, so it's empowering their wider business to take responsibility for that. The product itself is offered as software as a service, so it's entirely hosted and managed by us. There are no IT requirements on this. As long as you have access to a modern browser and an internet connection, then you are good to go. Pricing, we're entirely public about the way that transparent about the way that we do our pricing. On our website, we have our pricing for our public and our private sector organisations on there, and we're also on G-Cloud for any organisations in the public sector where that might be useful. And very finally, implementation. It takes about 3 days for us to turn this around and hand a completed version to you. And all of our subscriptions to this product cover you on an unlimited basis. We don't kind of charge additionals for little bolt-ons and what have you. Everything, your subscription covers you on an unlimited basis for users and DPIAs or ISAs, whichever you choose to take. There's obviously the usuals, full service level agreement, and we provide training as well as part of your license to the product. We do offer single sign-on. That is the only additional cost at this point. There's a small setup charge for us to set up single sign-on for you if that's of interest. So I think that's largely the 2 of us covered. We are bang on time for a few questions at the end. If anyone wants any more information from ourselves, wants access to our demo environment, just get in touch with us either via our website or contact me directly on my email address, leanne.hawkins@coalescent.uk. And indeed, i3Secure and Barry and his information is there as well. So I guess it's over to you guys now. Any questions that you have, please do pop them in chat or unmute your microphones or put your hands up, and we will come to you now. I'll stop sharing my screen and see if we have anything. I don't think there's any in conversation. So I guess no hands up at the moment. Some of the very obvious questions that we tend to get are for our Dapian product are can it integrate with other systems? So maybe you've got an information asset register that you're using elsewhere or others. Yes, absolutely. As part of this being funded by the public sector, we had to develop the APIs and the connections and publicly publish those for anyone that wanted to achieve integration with other systems. So yes, they are available. And we have a hand up, I think, from Nathan.
Hi, Leanne, thanks for that. I've got just one question for you, or one for Barry as well. So in terms of Dapian products, whereabouts is it hosted?
It's hosted in the UK on AWS, so in London to be specific, Amazon Web Services.
Yeah, superb. Thanks, Leanne. And I guess one for Barry as well. If we have the ISO 27001 certification, when do we need to make the changes to Annex A that you mentioned? And if we're currently implementing, should we stop or should we carry on based on the changes that are coming?
Okay, so where we're up to with the 27002 changes are trial and calibration. So on the back end of that trial and calibration will be a review of what they've learned, and then a release to say yes, these changes are going ahead, or these changes are going ahead, but with the following caveats or the following adjustments. And that is anticipated to be in January/February, at least Q1 2022, and then from there. Yes, it's not immediately. Now you have to have an SOA which says this list of controls instead of the one you've been using. There will be a grace period. So with that answer to your next question, which I think was if you're currently having a go at 27001, should you stop? I would say no, because the time at which you've got to demonstrate compliance to any changes which are coming is in the distant future. It's just more of a conscious, be aware thing. You know, if you're not covering things like cloud services or threat intelligence, some of those newer things which are coming, then it's just a heads up this to say you might need to have a look at those, because in the future you will have to demonstrate that you've addressed those as risk controls. I hope that helps.
Yeah, superb. Thanks, Barry.
I can't see anyone else's hand. Nope.
No.
Okay.
But I was going to say, I'll just pop up the our contact slide again, just so they've got our details. If they do have any questions, please do feel free to get in touch. 1 second. There we go. So our contact details are there for anyone that does have any questions following this, or as I say, anyone that wants access to our demo environment, just give us a shout. But thank you very much, guys, for taking time to join us. So this will be the first in a series that i3Secure do, and indeed i3Secure and Dapian do together. So I look forward to seeing you again at other events in the future.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, guys, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye all. Thanks.